Her lover one day takes off for a walk in a section of the city where they never go, the Montsouris Park. After they have taken a stroll in the park and have sat together side by side on the edge of a lawn, they notice, at one corner of the park, at an intersection where there are never any taxis, a car which, because of its meter, resembles a taxi. "Get in," he says. She gets in. It's autumn and coming to dusk. She is dressed as she always is: high heels, a suit with a pleated skirt, a silk blouse, and no hat, but long gloves which come up to over the sleeves of her jacket, and in her leather handbag she has her identification papers, her compact, and her lipstick. The taxi moves off slowly, the man still not having said a word to the driver, but he pulls down the shades of the windows on both sides of the car, and the shade on the back window. She has taken off her gloves, thinking he wants to kiss her, or that he wants her to caress him. But instead he says, "Your bag's in your way. Let me have it." She gives it to him. He puts it out of her reach and adds, "You also have on too many clothes. Unfasten your stockings and roll them down to above your knees. Here are some garters." By now the taxi has picked up speed, and she has some trouble managing it. She's also afraid the driver may turn around. Finally, though, the stockings are rolled down, and she's embarrassed to feel her legs naked and free beneath her silk slip. Besides, the loose garter belt suspenders are slipping back and forth. "Unfasten your garter belt," he says, "and take off your panties." That's easy enough. All she has to do is slip down her hands behind her back and raise herself slightly. He takes the garter belt and panties from her, opens her bag and puts them in, then says, "You shouldn't sit on your slip and skirt. Pull them up behind you and sit directly on the seat." The seat is made of some sort of imitation leather which is slippery and cold. It's quite an extraordinary sensation to feel it sticking to your thighs. Then he says, "Now put your gloves back on." The taxi is still moving along at a good clip, and she doesn't dare ask why Renee just sits there without moving or saying another word. Nor can she guess what all this means to him, having her there motionless, silent, so stripped and exposed, so thoroughly gloved, in a black car going God knows where. He hasn't told her what to do or what not to do, but she's afraid either to cross her legs or press them together. She sits with gloved hands braced on either side of her seat. "Here we are," he says suddenly. Here we are. The taxi stops on a lovely avenue beneath a tree. They are plane trees, in front of some sort of small private home which can be seen nestled between the courtyard and the garden. The type of small private dwelling one finds along the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The street lamps are some distance away, and it's still fairly dark inside the car. Outside, it is raining. "Don't move," Renee says. "Sit perfectly still." His hand reaches for the collar of her blouse, unties the bow, then unbuttons the blouse. She leans forward slightly, thinking he wants to fondle her breasts. No. He is merely groping for the shoulder straps of her brassiere, which he snips with a small penknife. Then he takes it off. Now, between her blouse, which he has buttoned back up, her breasts are naked and free, as is the rest of her body, from waist to knee. "Listen," he says. "Now you're ready. This is where I leave you. You're to get out and go ring the doorbell. Follow whoever opens the door for you and do whatever you're told. If you hesitate about going in, they'll come and take you in. If you don't obey immediately, they'll force you to." "Your bag?" "No. You have no further need for your bag. You're merely the girl I'm furnishing. Yes, of course I'll be there. Now run along." Another version of the same beginning was simpler and more direct. The young woman, dressed in the same way, was driven by her lover and an unknown friend. The stranger was driving. The lover was seated next to the young woman, and it was the unknown friend who explained to the young woman that her lover had been entrusted with the task of getting her ready, that he was going to tie her hands behind her back, unfasten her stockings and roll them down, remove her garter belt, her pannies, and her brassiere, and blindfold her. That she would then be turned over to the chateau, where in due course she would be instructed as to what she should do. And in fact, as soon as she had been thus undressed and bound, they helped her to alight from the car after a trip that lasted half an hour, guided her up the steps and, with her blindfold still on, through one or two doors. Then, when her blindfold was removed, she found herself standing alone in a dark room, where they left her for half an hour, 2 hours, I can't be sure, but it seemed forever. Then, when at last the door was opened and the light turned on, you could see that she had been waiting in a very conventional, comfortable, yet distinctive room. There was a thick rug on the floor, but not a stick of furniture, and all 4 walls were lined with closets. The door had been opened by 2 women, 2 young and beautiful women, dressed in the garb of pretty 18th century chambermaids. Full skirts, made out of some light material, which were long enough to conceal their feet, tight bodices, laced or hooked in front, which sharply accentuated the bust line, lace frills around the neck, half-length sleeves. They were wearing eyeshadow and lipstick. Both wore a close-fitting collar and had tight bracelets on their wrists. I know it was at this point that they freed O's hands, which were still tied behind her back, and told her to get undressed. They were going to bathe her and make her up. They proceeded to strip her till she hadn't a stitch of clothing left, then put her clothes away neatly in one of the closets. She was not allowed to bathe herself, and they did her hair as at the hairdresser's, made her sit in one of those large chairs which tilts back when they wash your hair, and straightens back up after the hair has been set and you're ready for the dryer. That always takes at least an hour. Actually, it took more than an hour, but she was seated on this chair, naked, and they kept her from either crossing her legs or bringing them together. And since the wall in front of her was covered from floor to ceiling with a large mirror, she was unbroken by any shelving. She could see herself, thus open, each time her gaze strayed to the mirror. When she was properly made up and prepared, her eyelids penciled lightly, her lips bright red, the tip and halo of her breasts highlighted with pink, the edges of her nether lips rouged, her armpits and pubis generously perfumed, and perfume also applied to the furrow between her thighs, the furrow between her breasts, and to the hollows of her hands. She was led into a room where a 3-sided mirror and another mirror behind enabled her to examine herself closely. She was told to sit down on the ottoman, which was set between the mirror, and wait. The ottoman was covered with black fur, which pricked her slightly. The rug was black, the walls red. She was wearing red mules. Set in one of the walls of the small bathroom was a large window, which looked out onto a lovely dark park. The rain had stopped, the trees were swaying in the wind, the moon raced high among the clouds. I have no idea how long she remained in the red bedroom, or whether she was really alone, and she surmised, or whether someone was watching her through a peephole camouflaged in the wall. All I know is that when the 2 women returned, one was carrying a dressmaker's tape measure and the other a basket. With them came a man dressed in a long purple robe, full at the shoulders. When he walked, the robe flared open from the waist down. One could see that beneath his robe he had on some sort of tights, which covered his legs and thighs, but left the sex exposed. It was the sex that I saw first, when he took his first step, then the whip, made of leather thongs, which he had stuck in his belt. Then she saw that the man was masked by a black hood, which concealed even his eyes behind a network of black gauze. And finally,